All right, so it is just after 12 and we're going to get started. And thank you for joining us today for our Horticulture Lunch and Learn. My name is Allisa Zurbuchen, and I am the Horticulture Specialist for CSU Extension in El Paso County. Today, we're going to be specifically focusing in on how to manage grasshoppers in your home garden with a particular look at what's happening in El Paso County, but we had registrants from all over the state and some from out of state. So I think that even if you're not located here in El Paso County, you'll find this information useful. I want to thank Friends of Extension, which is a major supporter of our horticulture program here in El Paso County. So some quick housekeeping things. What is Extension? We are the outreach arm of Colorado State University, and CSU is the land-grant university here in Colorado. So we provide research-based information to the community. We have more than just our horticulture program, which also entails our Master Gardener program. We also have a lot of youth programs. So that entails our 4-H youth development. They have club programs, they have camps, they have lots of other youth development opportunities that you can check out. We also have lots of classes regarding local foods, food safety, and food preservation. So if you want to learn about cottage foods, canning, different nutrition classes, baking bread, making salsa, those are all things that you can learn through programs here at our extension office in El Paso County. We have a number of plant-related classes coming up that I want to highlight. So we are on May 1st here, managing grasshoppers in the home garden. We have a pollinator gardening class that's online on May 14th. And then we have a series of Colorado Native Plant Master courses. Each course is made up of 3 half-day classes that are field botany. So if you want to learn how to identify plants, that's a great way to get some basics on plant ID and using books and dichotomous keys to do that. We have a class on June 7th on Intro to Botanical Drawing and Illustrating. It's okay if you're not the most fantastic artist, but a lot of people learn through different methods. And during this class, you'll get the opportunity to draw plant parts and learn different plant parts and botanical terms through illustrating them. We'll also have a Birds and Blooms hike in Aiken Canyon Preserve on June 10th. So if you enjoy birding and you want to learn more about how birds and plants are interconnected, that's a great opportunity for you. We'll have a more casual field botany wildflower walk in Cheyenne Canyon on June 14th. So you can find registration for all those events at epcextension.eventbrite.com. That is where you registered for this webinar today. And Colorado State University Extension is an equal opportunity provider. Colorado State University does not discriminate on the basis of disability and is committed to providing reasonable accommodations. CSU's Office of Engagement and Extension ensures meaningful access and equal opportunities to participate to individuals whose first language is not English. So let's jump into managing grasshoppers in the home garden. Grasshoppers have been a hot topic across the state, and CSU has had a number of different webinars. When I email you after class, I'll try to link as many resources and other webinars as possible. Today, though, we're going to be specifically focusing on how you as home gardeners can manage them in your garden. And like I mentioned, I'm located in El Paso County, and most of you attending today are located in this area. So we're going to look specifically at grasshoppers in our area here. We're going to go through, first off, some basics of integrated pest management, also called IPM, because that's really going to inform the feasibility of some of our management strategies. We'll then do a deep dive into the grasshopper life cycle and the damage that grasshoppers do, but I'm thinking that many of you personally already have experienced grasshopper damage. That's why you're here today, so you'll be familiar with the damage that grasshoppers cause. And then we'll wrap up by different management strategies. So pictured here, I took all these pictures in Fountain, where we have an extension community garden, and the grasshoppers were particularly bad in Fountain last year. This community garden is surrounded by open space where you'll learn more about why, but grasshoppers thrive in those open spaces and then can move in and destroy a lot of our garden crops. So we see two grasshoppers mating on the left. We see grasshopper damage to a squash species in the middle. And then on the right, we see them climbing this stem, and this behavior is called roosting. And so they'll position themselves in a place where as soon as the temperatures are warm enough, they can immediately start feeding. They're already in place and ready to go. So like I mentioned, we're going to first talk about some integrated pest management basics. And to introduce this concept, we need to understand the idea of a threshold. Specifically, we're going to be talking about damage thresholds and amount of tolerable damage. So a threshold is referring to the number of pests or the level of damage at which management action should be taken. For you as home gardeners, this is going to be different than what large scale producers of our different agronomic crops are going to have. And so when you're reading about grasshopper management strategies and poking around trying to find fact sheets and that kind of thing, you might be looking at something that talks about scouting for grasshoppers, looking for a certain number of grasshoppers in an area and taking action after that number has been counted. And that is going to be something that helps large scale producers anticipate when they need to start taking different management strategy steps. For you as a home gardener, though, that might not be something that you need to do or that you're interested in doing. A lot of people, though, unfortunately, don't notice the signs of grasshoppers until they're already in a larger, getting a phase that's getting closer to adulthood and destroying their crops. And so I'd encourage you to think through what kind of scouting steps can you take now to anticipate what kind of management strategies you need to do. For a lot of us, we don't really want to tolerate any damage to our vegetables because we put all this hard work and effort into growing them, and then that tomato is getting ripe and we've put all this effort in and we've had all this patience, and then the grasshoppers come in and take bites from that tomato. And so our threshold might be relatively low, and that's okay. But it's important to think through what is actually feasible. For a lot of people, you might not be growing vegetables, but I noticed some of you in the chat mentioned some more ornamental plants that were damaged by grasshoppers. And so for you, you might be looking more at an aesthetic threshold. So what level of damage can you tolerate until it's noticeable when you're standing in your front yard or people are maybe walking past your house? And thinking through, when are you going to take action before we get to a threshold that you can no longer tolerate? So here is a pyramid of integrated pest management tactics. And a lot of us last year jumped right into chemical because we noticed that things were already utterly destroyed by grasshoppers and we were desperate to do something. And so people jumped right into the top of this pyramid and started applying chemicals. But now that we know, and I'm going to explain more why, but this is going to be another bad grasshopper year. I hear a lot of people saying, I hope it's just going to be better. Maybe it will be better. That's very unlikely. And so understanding this pyramid and starting to notice things before they reach the intolerable threshold can give us more options like cultural, physical, and biological tactics before we get to the chemical. So let's talk a little bit about what those tactics are. With our cultural tactics, these are going to be things that are involving what plants we are putting in our garden and where we are putting them. And so we'll talk more about this, but grasshoppers tend to hone in on specific plants, especially after they hatch from their eggs and are in their early nymphal stage. And so having a biodiverse palette of plants in your yard might be a good cultural practice you could consider. Also, the fertility of your landscape is going to impact how healthy your plants are, which is going to then impact whether or not grasshoppers are feeding and how much damage they can do to the plants. You might want to think things through with crop rotation if the grasshoppers like certain things in your yard, and cleaning up at the end of the gardening season or in early spring. We also have different strategies that are physical or mechanical. So this is going to involve things like weeding, putting up insect traps. So with grasshoppers, last year, molasses traps were really popular. Mulching to prevent perhaps insects from emerging from their eggs in the spring. Tilling, and then also using physical barriers like insect netting. We have some biological strategies. So these are going to be fostering landscapes where natural predators of grasshoppers exist. We'll talk more about that in detail coming up. And then finally, we get to our chemical strategies. So those are going to be higher in toxicity. And a lot of our chemical strategies are going to impact more than just our target pest. Our target pest today being grasshoppers. A lot of chemical strategies are going to have impacts to other insects and wildlife as well. And so this would be something that we would be considering more as a last resort or during outbreak years. So yesterday, many of us did experience outbreak conditions. I want to talk briefly on the front end about chemicals, and we're going to talk more about chemicals at the end, but everything is chemical. So I hear a lot of people say that they're applying things like household kitchen products, thinking, oh, that's not a chemical. And so I'm avoiding those harsh chemicals. But kitchen products, any product is going to be chemical based. We as humans are chemical based. And so there's not really going to be any avoidance of chemicals. Things that are labeled for specific application are pesticides, for example, that are labeled for controlling grasshoppers, have been studied and examined. They have disclaimers about safety. They have rules about how to use and store that product. And so in following those rules are going to be very important. And in fact, it is the law. So when you purchase something, you need to read that label. You've entered into a contract where you are required to read that label and follow that label. It is important that you use any protective equipment that is detailed on the label. We're going to get into this more, and I will send this in an email later, but we do have some links regarding pesticide toxicity if you have more questions about that. So I want to see on the front end, I'm going to have a number of places where you can ask questions, and you'll see this question slide to indicate that. You can type questions into the chat at any point and we'll answer them during these question slides. Before we move into specifics on grasshoppers, do you have any questions about IPM basics or chemicals? I'll give you about 15 seconds to plop those in the chat. Like I said, I can get to more questions later if you need more time to type them in. I see folks mentioning eco brand. What exactly is this? Is a question we got in the chat. Great. I'm glad you have seen that. We're going to talk about eco brand in depth coming up because that is one of the products that's most readily available to you as home gardeners and is labeled for controlling grasshoppers. Great question. Okay, so let's move on and talk more on grasshopper details. Grasshoppers are in the insect order Orthoptera, and if you care about where that term might come from, I like learning these kinds of things because it helps me remember specifics about grasshoppers. But ortho means straight and ptera means wing. So insects in this order have straight wings. Katydids and crickets are also in this order as well. We have more than 100 species of grasshoppers in Colorado. Only a few of those species negatively impact our garden plants, and so we'll be focusing specifically on those today. Grasshoppers have mandibles that are used for chewing, and you can see that pictured here. We have these chewing mouth parts, and then they have hind legs that are adapted for jumping and traveling long distances. We're going to talk more about their life cycle, but to briefly summarize, they hatch from eggs. These eggs are overwintering in the soil, and then the grasshoppers are hatching now, so they have already begun to hatch. When they hatch, they go through a variety of stages of nymphal development. So they start as teeny tiny grasshoppers. When they hatch, they look just like grasshoppers, just really, really small. And then they'll go through usually 5 stages that are called instar stages, where they're going to molt their exoskeleton and get a little bit bigger, and then develop their exoskeleton more, molt that, and then again get bigger. During this nymph phase, they can only walk or jump. And so as we talk about management strategies later, it's going to be really focused on applying these strategies while they are nymphs. And this time is right now. We have nymphs right now. Once they reach the adult stage, they get an added element of movement and they can fly. So their wings become usable and they can fly, sometimes very long distances. We'll talk more about that as we look at specific grasshopper species. So again, want to focus on, people will be like, why do we need to know about this life cycle? It's because we're going to be applying our strategies when the grasshoppers are most vulnerable. Grasshoppers aren't all bad, and I want to talk about some fun facts. So female grasshoppers are larger than males. You could see in that picture, this is the male, and it's mating with the female grasshopper that is larger. They have a tympana, or an eardrum, that's tucked under its wing. So sometimes people will simplify this and they'll say, did you know grasshoppers have ears in their stomach? That's not quite true, but they do have an eardrum that's on their abdomen under their wings. Depending on the species of grasshopper, the female can lay 100 eggs by the fall, so they can reproduce quite prolifically. They have some funny behaviors. So sometimes you'll see them stilting, and this is usually during the heat of the day, and they will straighten their legs and raise their body from the soil surface to reduce their body temperature because they can only feed at certain temperatures. And if it goes above that temperature, they can't feed. If it drops below that temperature, they actually cannot excrete their feces, and so they will stop eating at colder temperatures. We also see a behavior called pottering. So throughout, after they hatch, grasshoppers are mostly eating and mating. And while they are not eating, they have to walk off their meals and then resume eating. So this behavior is called pottering, where they're walking off their meal. They are an important part of the food chain. Like I said before, we have lots of species, only a couple are pests in our gardens. And grasshoppers in general are eaten by a lot of different wildlife. I took all of these pictures and I like to remind myself that I wouldn't get to enjoy these wildlife if they didn't have plenty of food in our ecosystem. So on the left, we have a shrike, and they will eat grasshoppers and other rodents and other birds even. We have on the towards the left on the bottom, we have some owlets. So these are great horned owlets. And for most of our bird species, feeding their young involves giving them a lot of insects and a lot of protein. Our grasshoppers are pretty big bang for the buck when it comes to an animal having to hunt, because they're much larger than a lot of our other insects. So they hunt, they put this energy into hunting, they catch it, and it has lots of calories that are high in protein. And so it's really important for raising young birds that they have access to things like grasshoppers. We have a kestrel in the middle. Kestrel diets have a lot of grasshoppers in it. We have a bluebird, and then there's even mammals that will eat grasshoppers. So these are some fox kits that I saw. Coyotes will also eat grasshoppers, and then a lot of mammals will opportunistically eat grasshoppers. So it might not be something they're hunting, but when the opportunity presents itself, they will enjoy that snack. We also have different insects that are natural predators of grasshoppers, and it's important to think about this, especially if we're applying chemicals that can harm other insects as well. So robber flies will hunt nymphs and adult grasshoppers. We have a picture of one on the left here. And then we have blister beetles. And so blister beetles will eat the eggs of grasshoppers. So those eggs are deposited in the soil, and the blister beetles will find those nests and eat them before they hatch. And we see a lot of blister beetle populations booming at the same time as grasshopper populations, because when they have lots of food, so the blister beetle populations are going up as well. Unfortunately, blister beetles will also defoliate a lot of our plants, and so people will try to eradicate the blister beetles. I would encourage you to maybe think through if you're willing to tolerate some blister beetles in your garden to help keep your grasshopper populations in check, because these blister beetle populations are also going to decline when our grasshopper populations decline. So let's move into our specific grasshoppers that are pests in our gardens. And iNaturalist can be a great way for you to see what insects are located in the area that you're located. So specifically here, these are the observations of grasshoppers in Colorado Springs specifically. The most common grasshopper that we see here is the two-striped grasshopper. And these tend to move into our gardens from roadside areas, unmaintained lots, and areas where the soil's not disturbed. So if you have an easement or an open space, or maybe just a vacant lot, or maybe a neighbor that doesn't take care of the weeds in their garden and leaves that soil undisturbed, that can be a perfect place for the two-striped grasshopper to boom. Then they will hatch, feed on the weeds in that site, and then they can move into your garden. So the developing nymphs will eat a lot of things, but some of their favorites include ragweed, annual sunflowers, prickly lettuce, clover, and a number of other weeds. And so I specifically picked out these weeds because we see these weeds a lot in Colorado Springs, and a lot of people, myself included, love sunflowers, but this can be a great host plant for developing grasshopper nymphs. They can become a major pest of certain crops, specifically a lot of grain crops, alfalfa, and corn, and they hatch in bursts. So you'll see a burst of two-striped grasshoppers. They'll start getting bigger. There'll be some rain and some warmer temps, and then you'll see another burst. They often will hatch following these rain periods because their food, being weeds, are booming after we get a lot of spring rain. This species is not going to feed when temps are below 77 degrees because, like I mentioned before, they cannot expel feces, so they stop eating. So if we have colder temperatures, that's a great time to maybe think about trying to round them up. We'll talk about how you can round them up with a net later in this class. Also, their movement begins in the morning when it's 75 degrees. So timing-wise, if you're trying to do any physical capturing, morning is a great time to capture them before they start moving. When they are adults and when we are in the heat of summer and temperatures exceed 86 degrees, they will swarm and they can travel very long distances on the wind. So we're not going to talk about migratory grasshoppers just because of time, and I don't want to bog you down with too many details on grasshopper species, but there's a lot of grasshoppers that fly and travel long distances on the wind other than just the migratory grasshopper. Let's talk next about the red-legged grasshopper. These tend to be more abundant in moist sites that have a lot of weedy hosts. So they love dandelions, again, ragweed, kochia, and clovers. And they predominantly, I guess their favorite place to be would be kind of like moist ditch areas where there's lots of vegetation and weeds. They can become a major pest of alfalfa, clover, soybeans, and small grains. And once they move into your garden, some of their favorite crops are going to be corn, beans, beets, cabbage, and potatoes. And personally, I've seen them just massacre all the above ground growth of potato plants. But they're also going to feed on grasses. So they do eat Kentucky bluegrass and they love smooth brome. So a lot of us have smooth brome that's encroached into our landscapes or might have been part of a seed mix that you could have planted. And this is a grass that can become quite invasive in a lot of landscapes and wipe out native plant species in open spaces. And this grass is ideal for nymphal development of red-legged grasshoppers. When they do reach adulthood and develop wings, during drought years, they will develop longer wings so that they can make longer flights. So that's a fun fact. And then we have one more species we're going to talk about. That is the differential grasshopper. So when they hatch, they move into gardens a little bit earlier in the season. They look different. I'm not sure that you're going to be so interested in IDing your grasshoppers by species, but in case you are, I want you to see, because we can see all three of these species that we've talked about on the left side here. Our differential grasshopper doesn't have the black markings on its head, and it has these, I think they're kind of pretty, but these markings on their femur, on their jumping legs. Our red-legged has those as well, but they have more reddish, like a rufous color on their legs. And our two-striped grasshopper has two stripes that run along its black back, and it has more darker markings. So our differential grasshopper, you can tell pretty easily from the other two species. It's going to impact all of the previously mentioned crops, but it also will take down your fruit trees. And so it will defoliate those trees, which is going to impact how much the overall health and vigor of your fruit tree. So it can then impact the harvest from your fruit trees because the tree itself might not have enough leaves to photosynthesize. So that is fun for our trees. With the differential grasshopper, they really love wilted and damaged sunflowers. And so again, I love sunflowers, but if you have big areas of sunflowers and you have fruit trees in your yard and it's an outbreak year of grasshoppers, our sunflowers, the ones that we see commonly are annuals, so you might want to just think through maybe this isn't the year to have your big sunflower patch. For a differential grasshopper, they can also fly long distances. They have been observed by airplane pilots at 14,000 feet, and they can fly at slightly cooler temperatures. So their flights peak when temperatures reach 81 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas some of our others are more in that 86 to 90 degree range. So I want you to ponder this question for a moment. If grasshoppers are not introduced or invasive, why are their populations sometimes so devastating now? So I'm going to let you ponder that for a second. I think that the answers may be a little too complicated to have people write in the chat. So I want you to just think about this, and then I'm going to unpack this a little bit. So our grasshoppers are native, and generally native species, their populations can be kept in check. But why are the populations not being kept in check now? Should have had some Jeopardy music queued up. All right, so I'm going to go back. When we were talking about these species, I want you to notice that they really like weeds, especially things like our red-legged. They like these moist sites with abundant weeds. And this landscape, before it was developed, was in El Paso County, largely short grass prairie and foothills. And as we moved in, we brought a lot of weedy species with us that had different nutrition components that aid in nymphal development of our grasshoppers. So like I mentioned, smooth brome, really high in protein. A lot of our weeds have the right kinds of nutrients for ideal growth and development of grasshoppers. We also have these undisturbed sites that perhaps these are borders around acreages or, like I mentioned, easements or vacant lots in developed areas where weeds proliferate. We irrigate, and that helps with vegetative growth of a lot of weedy species, whereas before those species wouldn't have thrived quite as much. So we have changed our environment in a way that is aiding development of grasshoppers. They can move long distances. And so when they have these areas where they can have population booms, they can then travel far. There's also a component when we answer this question of climate, and we're going to talk a little bit more about warmth and climate coming up. Let's next talk about grasshopper damage, though, so you can recognize it. But to be honest, I'm pretty sure most of you can recognize it. And grasshoppers are typically going to be present. So earwigs cause similar looking damage, but they only come out at night, whereas your grasshoppers are going to be sitting right there, so you can identify them. You'll see frass on the leaves, which I have here, but there's not actually a lot of frass pictured here. And frass is just a fancy term for their poop. They'll have these little poop pellets that will accumulate on the leaves, and you can shake those off. They will also chew on the margins of leaves, so we see a couple doing that here. They will sometimes damage fruit, like I mentioned, my tomatoes. They will often eat the leaves entirely, or they will just skeletonize leaves. So they're traveling around the ribs and the veins of the leaves and eating all the tissue of the plant between. So why are they so hard to manage? They are highly mobile. We mentioned they can walk, they can fly, they can jump, and they have armor. So their exoskeleton has these hard but flexible plates that are made up of chitin. And when you apply a product to them, it can be hard to get that product to penetrate these chitinous armor plates. So it's hard to get product applied to them. It's hard to get it's hard to apply anything, whether that's even just a blast of water directly to them because they can move so easily. And there's also this element of temperature. So let's talk a little bit more about the life cycle because temperature is the driving factor for this. So our grasshopper adults, they lay their eggs in the summer and the beginning of fall. And those eggs must develop to a certain level before they reach a stage of diapause for the winter. And so in order for these eggs to develop successfully, they need a certain level of heating degree units in the fall. Then during the winter, they are essentially dormant, and the fancy term is diapause. And then in the spring, they need more warmth in order to hatch and have a successful hatch. Once they hatch, if it is cold, they cannot feed. And if there is lots of moisture, they will often they'll get like knocked off of plants. It'll bring the overall temperature down. So again, they won't be able to feed. Once they reach a stage where they can move around, that's going to be largely driven by temperature. So 75 degrees. And I mentioned that varies a little bit by species earlier. But if it's too cold for them to move, they're not going to be able to feed. So ideally, they want a really warm April and May and into June, because that's when they're at nymphs and they're going to be feeding. They're going to feed at temperatures between 81 and 90 degrees. And then when they reach their adult stage, they're going to fly between temperatures of 86 to 90 degrees. There was the one species we talked about that can fly at a slightly cooler temperature. So let's look at our 2024 and try to understand why our grasshopper populations boomed so much. So this is autumn of 2023, when grasshopper eggs were developing in the soil. You can see El Paso County boxed in here, and it was in parts of the county the top 10 of warmest autumns on record for the last 129 years. When we went into winter, again, El Paso County is here, and it was very, very warm again in that winter. Spring of 2024, so this is last spring, was again warm, not necessarily top 10, but very warm and ideal for grasshopper development. And then the summer was extremely warm. So top 10 hottest summers on record for the last 130 years. And you may recall our monsoons here in El Paso County felt like they never really came. We did have rains, but it was one of the drier summers. So a lot of people have said, oh, maybe grasshoppers just won't be such a problem this year. Maybe it will be better. And I love that you are hopeful, but it's really important that you take action now because it's quite unlikely that grasshoppers are going to just magically go away this year. And let's talk about why. Autumn of last year, 2024, and this was, following a really big grasshopper population where there were lots of adults laying lots of eggs. That autumn was extremely hot, top 10 hottest on record in El Paso County. So not only did we have a lot of adults laying a lot of eggs, we also had ideal development temperatures for those grasshoppers. Moving into the winter, it wasn't so hot. It was pretty average. But then March is been extremely hot. We haven't had our April reports yet because it's May 1st and it takes a little bit for our Colorado Climate Center to get these reports out. But they reported that Eastern Colorado was very warm during March with temperatures more than 4 degrees above average, ranking among the top 10 warmest Marches on record. And so, again, this is ideal conditions for grasshopper eggs to finish development and for nymphs to hatch, which we have seen them already hatching in April. So let's take a moment for questions. And if you have questions about, their development, this is a great time for that before we get into management strategies. Okay, so I see there's a question that says, I see one of the foods listed as clover. Does that mean that microclover is not a good idea for lawns? That's a great question. And the answer is that it depends. In general, though, with microclover in lawns, it has been increasingly popular over the past few years, but it's not something that we necessarily recommend because microclover takes as much water to establish as most of our turfgrass species. It can have an added benefit of if you let it flower, that could support some pollinators, but there are some other flowering plants that could support more pollinators and more than just our European honeybees. So different border plantings with native plants are going to support lots of our native bee species in addition to honeybee species. So yes, the grasshoppers do benefit from clovers, including microclovers. But whether it's a good idea for your lawn is really going to be up to you and your goals that you have for your landscape. You might be able to accomplish those goals through planting other things in other places. I'm not seeing any other questions popping up yet, so feel free to keep working on those and I will answer those at our next question break. So we're going to get into our management strategies now, and we'll focus first on our non-chemical strategies because when we talked about that IPM pyramid in the beginning, if possible, it's great to employ some of these strategies before we jump to our chemical strategies. Cultural strategies. These are not going to be effective during outbreak years. And last year was certainly an outbreak year for many of us. And this year could very well shape up to be another outbreak year. Some cultural strategies are going to be including planting trap crops. So certain things that grasshoppers really like on those lists with specific species. There are certain things that they really like. So you could have plantings of those to try to get the grasshoppers to those areas. And then you could maybe use a mechanical or physical strategy like a net to try to scoop them up and get rid of them. You could also plant varieties that are not their primary food. And as you can see, we don't have a lot of cultural strategies in this section. But planting variety is something that is going to be beneficial in your landscape for more than just grasshopper control. Having a more diverse plant palette in your yard is not only aesthetically beautiful, but helpful in controlling a lot of species that you might not want in your yard. Okay, so mechanical and physical strategies, there's a little bit more options here. In the time of the year when there are egg beds in the soil, you could consider tilling the upper layer of soil, especially if you've been able to identify where some of those egg beds might be. I wouldn't necessarily recommend just blanket tilling your soil, hoping to get the grasshopper eggs, because that's also going to expose weed seeds that are in the soil that are then going to get access to light and be able to germinate. And so targeted tilling where egg beds might be could be a helpful strategy with grasshopper control. You also will want to consider removing weedy vegetation because a lot of these weeds are the ideal forage for nymphs. And these weeds pop up early in the season. So as nymphs are hatching, which is now, we'll see a lot of these weedy species coming up. So we have our dandelions, we have a lot of our clovers, we have smooth brome, we have a lot of different things popping up for them already. Removing those weeds would be a good use of your effort. You can also trap and destroy grasshoppers. Like I mentioned, they're generally not moving or feeding between or when temperatures are below 75 degrees. So if you have chickens, that might be a good time to let them out for some supervised free ranging in the yard, or even just simple things like taking a bug catching net and going through your yard and trying to net the grasshoppers. Some people who are feeling particularly vindictive about grasshoppers will even just take scissors and cut them in half. Um, you could try to screen out grasshoppers from your prized crops with insect netting. And you'll want to make sure that you have that netting going all the way to the ground and potentially even burying the edges of the netting or putting rocks around the netting so that grasshoppers couldn't crawl underneath, which is going to make it really hard for pollinators to access those crops. So if you have netting, that's going to keep bees out and your plants may not receive pollinators. So you might not be getting the fruit yields that you want. It's also going to make it hard for you to pull weeds in that bed, and potentially there could be grasshopper eggs laid in that soil in your garden bed before you netted it in. So that's something to think through. And also grasshoppers, when they are particularly persistent, can chew through netting. I have a picture here in Fountain and the community garden where they had chewed through some of our insect netting. All right, so biological controls. In a perfect world, it would be great if we could send all the good guys to keep the grasshoppers in check, but they don't always listen to us. So what can we do? No bait is something that's really popular. Nosema locustae, and it is a microorganism that can kill grasshoppers. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because the manufacturing facility of Nosema locustae burned down a couple of years ago, and so it is virtually impossible for you to find this product for sale anywhere. It also has a shelf life, and so if you are finding it for sale somewhere, it is very likely expired. So let's talk about some other options. We have lots of birds that feed on grasshoppers. So these might be birds that you have, and perhaps you're a backyard poultry keeper. You might have turkeys or guinea fowl. Guinea fowl love grasshoppers, but they are super loud. And so a lot of people in urban areas would not choose to have guinea fowl. You might have chickens. And so, like I mentioned, letting the chickens out to free range when it's cool can be a good way to beat back some of the grasshoppers. The chickens will also eat your plants. And so you'll want to either exclude them from the plants or supervise them. But if you plant a more diverse plant palette in your yard that is attracting wild bird species, this could be a way to help keep grasshoppers in check. This isn't going to make a big dent during outbreak years, but in general is going to help keep their populations more manageable. So for those of you that have native plants, I saw some people in the chat mentioning, oh, I didn't have very many last year, but I'm worried about them this year. Then if you have a lot of wild birds in your yard, then perhaps you are not going to have as many grasshoppers in your yard. Also, consider allowing natural predators like blister beetles. I mentioned this before, but I think repetition is good. Blister beetles get a bad rap because they will defoliate your plants just like grasshoppers do. But you might want to consider letting them be in your yard in certain areas to help keep those grasshopper populations more manageable. Blister beetles can cause extreme skin irritation, so please be cautious around them. Do not touch them. Do not let kids touch them. Do not let your pets touch them. But if you apply certain chemical products, which we're going to talk about next, those will kill your blister beetles as well. So it's something to think about before you apply those products. Let's go into those chemical products. So, and first we're going to talk about timing, because if you wait until the grasshoppers are adults, it is too late for the most part. The nymphs are going to be more vulnerable than the adults. And right after they molt, they will be lacking their cuticle. And so it's a little bit hard to see here, but I have this picture with a lot of grasshoppers of different sizes. So we have this really big two-striped grasshopper here. We have one that's more green and one that's more brown. And so we see different phases of development. So one may have just molted and it doesn't have a cuticle yet. And so it might be a slightly different color than another. So if we can apply our chemical treatments, when they're in that smaller phase without the cuticle, that's when the treatments are going to have the most impact. Like I mentioned before, they go through a series of molts before adulthood. So you have time. They're nymphs right now, but they're going to reach adulthood sooner than you think. So use these next couple of weeks to apply some of these treatments if that's your choice. Nymphs feed more than adults. And so when we apply our treatments, they're going to become effective because the grasshopper nymphs are eating the plant that has the treatment applied to it. Adults eat less. So you're not going to see as much grasshopper mortality when they reach the adult phase. Adults can also fly, so they can just peace out at your garden and go somewhere else to feed. So when we look at our chemical controls, it can be really confusing and overwhelming. And these options are being updated, different trade names. So our brand, we'll see different brands of chemicals and they'll have trade names. And those trade names will then have a label that has active ingredients on it. And the trade name might stay the same, but the active ingredients can change very rapidly without us necessarily paying attention. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But that contributes to this being really complicated. People often want someone like me to just say, apply this product, make it simple for you, but it's never that simple. Let's first talk about pyrethroids. So permethrins and pyrethrins are in this category, and they are going to be active through pyrolysis. And that product must get through that exoskeleton, those plates of armor, in order to paralyze our insect. So it's causing damage to its nervous system. These products are applied through sprays and powders, and they have the same effect on beneficial insects as well as our target pest. So that's not ideal. We'll talk more about a pyrethroid coming up, though. We also have carbaryl as an option, and this causes destruction to the nervous system that prevents the grasshoppers from being able to breathe. And again, these are available as sprays and powders, but we also have a bait option. And so this will be a bran or some sort of grain option that has been impregnated by carbaryl. And so the grasshoppers are attracted to the bran, consume it, and also consume the carbaryl. In some ways, this is a little bit more ecologically, I guess, less damaging because only targeted insects will go to that brand or the brand product. But we're going to look at a carbaryl eco brand product coming up and look through the label and everything that it can target. We also have systemic insecticides, but we're not going to really talk about these because you can't use them on edible plants and they're very, very difficult to find. So this product would be called acephate. Um, and there are a lot more products that can be used for grasshoppers, but many of those products you must have a pesticide applicator license, and you wouldn't be able to purchase those products as a home gardener. So pyrethroids and carbaryl are going to be our main products that you can use as a home gardener. A lot of people are interested in using repellents, things like garlic oil or different vegetable oils, but those are not shown to be effective and in some cases can increase grasshopper feeding. So we're going to look at some labels together and unpack this a little bit more. We have pictured here Sevin insect killer, and it's the ready-to-use formula, meaning that it is already mixed up in a bottle. You do not need to do any mixing yourself. You just apply the product as a spray from the bottle. Historically, people tend to use Sevin synonymously with carbaryl because historically carbaryl was a main component or the only component of different Sevin products. And recently that has changed. And so we're going to look at the label and you're going to see that carbaryl isn't even on the label for this ready to use product. So let's switch over to that. I am going to try to zoom in a little bit for you on specific things. So here's our product label, kills on contact. And we look at our active ingredients here. and it's lambda cyhalothrin, and that is not carbaryl. Um, so this generally a lot of our Sevin products are using some more pyrethroids, but that will be something that based on the product you buy, you need to look into what the active ingredient is and how it works. So it kills over 700 listed insects. As you can imagine, it's going to kill a lot more than your target pest. Where I'm going to just draw your attention to certain things. So every product is going to contain these environmental hazards if there are any. This specifically says this product is extremely toxic to fish and other aquatic organisms. To protect the environment, do not allow pesticide to enter or run off into storm drains, drainage ditches, gutters, or surface waters. Applying this product in calm weather when rain is not predicted for the next 24 hours will help ensure that wind or rain does not blow or wash pesticide off the treatment area. This product is highly toxic to bees and other pollinating insects exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds if bees or other pollinating insects are visiting the treatment area. Like I mentioned, when you buy this product, you are entering into a legal contract. So if you apply this product to flowering, blooming crops or weeds, while pollinators are present, that is a violation of the contract and the law. So reading the label is very important. We also have our storage and disposal regulations, and I want to move on so that you can see where some of the application instructions are. So our labels are going to tell us specifically what the product is labeled to kill. This one mentioned over 700 species. And I want to first go to the bottom because this is a lot of information. And I want to know, does this impact grasshoppers? Are grasshoppers some of the 700 species? And I'm scrolling through here and I'm seeing crickets, spiders, leafhoppers, millipedes, ants, flies, cutworms, weevils, cockroaches, earwigs, grasshoppers. All right. And I told you about 3 specific grasshopper species that we have a lot in El Paso County. I'm seeing those here. So I see our two-striped grasshopper. I see our differential grasshopper. I also am looking for our red-legged grasshopper, which I did check before and I'm pretty sure I saw, but I don't want to spend too much time looking through this. So we see it's labeled for grasshoppers. That's good. But when we go back up, it talks about applying it in specific areas. So it can be applied to outdoor surfaces, ornamental trees, shrubs, and flowers. Okay, let's see if it controls grasshoppers in this usage. We look through insects controlled. Ants, armyworms, aphids. I'm not going to read the whole list to you, but let's skip down to where the G is. European sawfly, fall webworm, flea beetles, forest tent caterpillar, gypsy moth. Does not control grasshoppers on ornamental tree shrubs and flowers. So it hasn't been listed for this. We also wouldn't apply this because that would be a violation of usage if we're applying these to our ornamental tree shrubs and flowers for usage of grasshoppers or for control of grasshoppers. Homegrown vegetables. So a lot of you are here because you want to protect your vegetables. And we see specific vegetables listed here. And the grasshoppers are in these categories. So spoiler alert, grasshopper. We see grasshopper. We do see it for our corn. Our lettuces, grasshopper. It's not in the onions, but we do see it for tomato and tomatillo. So this would be a product that you could consider using on those plants. Again, if those plants are flowering, you would not be using it on those plants. All right, so you might be thinking, wow, I don't know about that. I want to think about other options. Let's look at another common option. We have our Eco brand pictured here. There are other brand products. I'm not endorsing any particular products here today, just walking through some of the most commonly used products. So our Eco brand, we have our active ingredients and we see carbaryl 2% is our active ingredient. let's look through this label a little bit more. Environmental hazards. This pesticide is extremely toxic to aquatic and estuarine invertebrates. Do not apply directly to water or wetlands. Do not contaminate water by cleaning of equipment or disposal of waste. So we don't see that same B disclaimer because we are not applying a brand to a flowering plant. This is a brand product that goes on the soil surface. Again, we have storage and disposal instructions. We have our general information. So home and garden, we see the rate at which you're applying that product here. Let's look and make sure that this is going to be effective for the insect that we're targeting. So it says for lawn, garden, and agricultural control of grasshoppers, crickets, armyworms, cutworms, darkling ground beetles, mole crickets, earwigs, and sow bugs. So this is going to be a product that we could use for our target pest, and we can see what other insects it could impact on this list here. So this is something that if you use this product, it is expensive, and you would want to apply that when nymphs are small to have the greatest impact. So we only have 4 minutes left, which is fine because we are rounding out the end of our presentation here. So this is a great time for you to type in any additional questions into the chat. I'm seeing, would a May freeze frost stunt this cycle? Yes, potentially. So especially if we have consistently cold spells more than just one cold night or day or one freeze, one snowstorm, that would be a little more effective in killing any nymphs that have emerged so far. Unfortunately, they can still survive when it's cold. They're just not able to feed. And so if it's cold for a long time and they cannot feed for a long time, that's going to be a lot more effective in killing them than just simply one day of cold temps. All right, and then we have, how might one narrow down areas where egg beds might be? Great question. So they're going to be laid in areas where there's a certain level of moisture and vegetative cover that are the right foods for the nymphs, because when they emerge, they can move, but they can only walk and jump, and they're very, very tiny. And so I would look in some of the areas in your yard that are like on the outskirts or weedier areas that might get less attention. I should have put a picture of it in here, but you could Google or use any search engine to find pictures of grasshopper eggs. They vary slightly by species and how they look, but they're laid in clusters and they're kind of oblong, kind of like a tic tac kind of shape. And then what are the trap crops? So the trap crops are going to depend on the species of grasshopper, but certain grasses and also certain weedy species, they'll definitely go to that area, but they love corn. So corn could be a trap crop, but I want to eat my ears of corn, so it's hard to sacrifice corn. There are certain cool season crops that certain species like. For example, you saw different brassicas like cabbages and things like that. So that could be something you consider using. I don't find trap cropping particularly effective for grasshoppers, and the populations that we have of grasshoppers these years are not like they're too large to consider this trap crop method. So I would maybe think through some of the other methods. And then how does one effectively apply eco brand broadcast around plants? Yes. So you're going to read the label for any brand product, and it's going to tell you the rate of application. So how much product to apply to a specific square footage. So you will need to do some math. It might be a much larger area on the label than what you're using in your yard. And that is also going to vary based on the developmental stage of the grasshopper. So when you apply it earlier, you could get away with a little less product because the nymphs are much smaller. All right, and then hollyhocks and iris protection. Good question. A lot of things love hollyhocks. So more than just the grasshoppers. And it's hard because the shape of these plants, like hollyhocks, can grow quite tall. Irises are tall, so using netting on these kinds of plants it's not going to be effective, and it's going to take away from the aesthetic beauty of those plants if you're covering it in netting. So that would be something where if you have an outbreak, applying like a baited brand product might be more effective, or using like a bug netting to try to grab those grasshoppers in the cool of the morning before they start moving. That is another option. And then are Sevin granules a bit safer than a spray? So the granule products, you will need to look at the label, because not all granular Sevin products are labeled for grasshoppers. They're labeled for other insects. So I would make sure before applying those, if you're trying to target grasshoppers, are grasshoppers even on the label? Then you mentioned molasses traps. Are they effective? So they can be. You will find dead grasshoppers in the molasses trap. However, you will need to clear these dead grasshoppers out regularly. It gets really, really stinky, and it might not keep them in check to the level at which you desire. So yes, they can kill grasshoppers. Can they keep the populations in check at an effective level? That's kind of up to you and what threshold you set. Neem oil and diatomaceous use. So generally, these products are not labeled for grasshoppers, and so you wouldn't use that to target that insect. But I could be wrong. So if you find a neem product that's labeled for grasshoppers, follow that label. Diatomaceous earth, if grasshoppers are feeding on a leaf that has DE on it, it could gum up their jaws. However, you're going to need to apply the DE a lot. As soon as it rains, a stiff wind blows through, that DE gets blown off the leaf. It looks aesthetically not good. Your plants are just covered in white powder. And again, it's not labeled for grasshoppers, so it's not shown to be an effective product for grasshopper control. Any chance that a new facility will produce NOLO? Wouldn't that be great? A difficulty with producing NOLO is that they need to culture the grasshoppers. So essentially they culture a population of grasshoppers and then have this strain of Nosema locustae that they can that's using the grasshopper as a host, and then they can cultivate and like product and sell the product of the NOLO. So it's not I guess unfortunately it's not as simple as just manufacturing a new product, because a lot goes into making NOLO. So we can hope, but I don't know of any changes on that front currently. We are past one. I'm not seeing any more questions. So if you would tell us how we did using this survey, that would be great. I will send this in an email with a whole bunch of resources to you when I send out the recording. And I emailed you all with the pre-class email, and you'll be getting an email from me again. So if you have any follow-up questions that I did not answer, feel free to send that to me via email. Thanks for joining today, and we hope to see you at upcoming classes.